A doctor's world came crashing down when he discovered what was between his 15-year-old patient's legs. The horrifying revelation would spark a manhunt across 3 states and expose a network of evil hiding in plain sight. What he found that night wasn't just medically impossible, it was a crime against humanity itself. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The bitter Montana winter howled outside Bozeman General Hospital, temperatures plummeting well below freezing as midnight came and went. 2 miles outside town, a black SUV with tinted windows slowed along an empty stretch of County Road 19, headlights briefly illuminating the snow-laden pines before cutting out entirely. The vehicle stopped. 2 men in dark clothing emerged, dragging something between them, something that whimpered. They tossed their burden into a roadside ditch like garbage, the girl's body making a sickening thud against the frozen earth. One man leaned down, his breath fogging in the frigid air as he whispered something that made the girl sob. The headlights flashed back on, and the SUV disappeared into the darkness, leaving only tire tracks in the fresh snow. The 15-year-old lay motionless for several minutes, her consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. Blood from dozens of cuts crystallized in the cold, while the grotesque spiral burn on her inner thigh throbbed with each heartbeat. She couldn't feel her fingers or toes anymore, a dangerous sign. Through swollen eyes, she spotted distant lights twinkling through the trees. Civilization, salvation. With a broken whisper that no one could hear, she began to crawl, each movement sending shards of agony through her battered body. "Please," she mouthed, leaving a crimson trail in the pristine snow behind her. Inside Bozeman General, Nurse Rachel Turner stifled a yawn as she organized patient charts at the quiet nurses' station. At 3:15 in the morning, the emergency room was eerily silent, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Rachel had worked the overnight shift for 5 years now, but something about tonight felt different, unsettled. The hospital seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. She shivered despite the warmth of her scrubs. That's when she heard it, frantic, desperate pounding at the emergency entrance doors. Rachel rushed across the polished floor, security codes forgotten in her haste. The automatic doors slid open to reveal a sight that would haunt her dreams for years to come. A naked teenage girl, covered in blood and dirt, collapsed beneath the flickering exterior lamp. "Oh my God!" Rachel gasped, rushing to the girl's side while screaming over her shoulder, "Dr. Carter! I need help out here now." Dr. Ben Carter, 29 and only 4 months into his residency, sprinted down the corridor, adrenaline instantly clearing the fatigue from his mind. What he was about to discover would change everything. Ben and Rachel burst through the ambulance bay doors into the frigid night air, their breath forming clouds in front of them. The gurney's wheels rattled across the uneven pavement as they approached the wreckage. Rachel reached the child first, her trained fingers finding a weak pulse. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, recoiling instinctively. The girl's skin felt like ice beneath her fingertips. But what made Rachel's stomach turn was the unmistakable metallic scent of burnt flesh, mingled with the coppery smell of blood. "Ben, she's alive, but barely." Ben didn't hesitate. With gentle urgency, he swept the small figure into his arms, cradling her like she weighed nothing. "She can't be more than 15, he muttered, his face grim as he sprinted back toward the emergency entrance. The automatic doors crashed open as they rushed through, the bright fluorescent lights of the trauma bay a stark contrast to the darkness outside. "Trauma Bay 1!" Rachel shouted, already pulling surgical gloves on. "We need blood, type O negative until we can cross-match." Every second felt like an eternity as they transferred the girl onto the trauma table. The blood was pooling steadily from between her legs, soaking through the makeshift bandages the paramedics had applied at the scene. The monitors began their ominous beeping as Rachel attached the leads with practiced efficiency. "BP's dropping, 60/30, she announced, her voice steady, despite the chaos around them. Chief Surgeon Mark Reynolds burst into the room, already gowned and gloved. "What have we got?" he demanded, moving to the head of the table with the confidence of a man who had seen everything in his 20 years of emergency medicine. Ben stepped back, giving the surgeon room to work. Adolescent female, approximately 15 years old, found at the scene of a house fire. Multiple trauma, severe bleeding from the pelvic region. Mark nodded, his experienced hands already moving to assess the patient. He lifted the thermal blanket covering the girl's lower body, and in that moment, everything changed. The room seemed to freeze as Mark's eyes registered what lay before him. The color drained from his face. His hands, which had performed countless surgeries without a tremor, began to shake uncontrollably. Without a word, he staggered backward, nearly colliding with a nurse before reaching a trash can in the corner of the room. The sound of the chief surgeon vomiting sent a chill through the trauma team. Rachel and Ben exchanged horrified glances as Mark gripped the edge of the bin, his knuckles white. What kind of monster?" Mark whispered, unable to finish his sentence. In all his years of medicine, through war zones and natural disasters, he had never seen such deliberate mutilation inflicted on a child. His mind struggled to process the cruelty, to compartmentalize it into something he could address as a doctor, rather than as a human being witnessing unspeakable evil. Rachel pressed trembling fingers against the girl's neck, feeling the weak but steady pulse beneath her skin. "Stay with us, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. The monitors beeped rhythmically, the only other sound besides the girl's shallow breathing. When Mark returned, his face was ashen, his normally confident demeanor replaced by something Rachel hadn't seen before, raw fear. "The lab results," he said, handing her the file with unsteady hands. "I've never seen anything like this." Before Rachel could respond, the girl's eyelids fluttered, her cracked lips parted, and a single word escaped: "Lila." The name hung in the air between them. The girl's eyes opened fully now, unfocused but desperate. "They made us stand in a circle," she continued, her voice a raspy whisper. "The whole village watched. Nobody helped us. Nobody stopped them." Mark leaned closer, medical training momentarily forgotten. "Who did this to you? Where?" "The chosen ones," she mumbled before her eyes rolled back. "The ritual, purification. They said we were special." Rachel shot Mark a concerned look. "We need to call the authorities. This isn't just abuse." Within the hour, Officer David Lane stood in the hospital corridor, notebook in hand, skepticism etched across his weathered face. Mark spoke rapidly, connecting dots that seemed impossible. "Audie, this isn't random violence or even trafficking," Mark insisted, lowering his voice. "I've read about this cult in medical journals from the 80s. They brand their chosen with that spiral pattern. They believe certain children possess spiritual energy they can harvest through these procedures." Lane raised an eyebrow. "Doctor, with all due respect, the brand is identical," Mark cut him off. "And her blood work shows traces of a specific hallucinogenic compound used in their rituals. This girl wasn't attacked by some random predator. She escaped something organized." The officer's skepticism wavered as Rachel joined them, carrying additional photos of the distinctive spiral brand. "She mentioned more girls," Rachel added quietly. "Someone named Lila, others who might still be there, wherever there is." Lane stared at the photos, his expression hardening. 23 years on the force hadn't prepared him for this. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling for backup and notifying special crimes," he said grimly. "If what you're saying is true, we don't have much time." The hospital's night shift brought a different kind of quiet, not peaceful but tense, like the air before a storm. Lila's temperature had spiked to 103 degrees shortly after midnight, her thin frame shivering despite the heat radiating from her skin. Rachel dabbed a cool cloth across the girl's forehead, watching her eyes dart frantically beneath closed lids, fighting demons in her fever dreams. "No, please," Lila mumbled, her fingers clutching at the sheets. "The circle! They're coming!" Rachel leaned closer, straining to catch the whispered fragments. In 12 years of nursing, she'd seen trauma victims before, but something about this girl's terror felt different, primal, almost ancient. The haunted look in those eyes, when they'd briefly opened earlier, had chilled Rachel to her core. Outside in the sterile hallway, Officer Sam Young adjusted his stance, rolling his shoulders to fight off fatigue. The chief had been explicit: 24-hour protection until they understood what they were dealing with. His hand drifted to his holstered weapon, a reflexive gesture that brought little comfort. Whatever had happened to the girl wasn't something a standard-issue Glock could protect against. 3 floors below, the hospital's forensics lab buzzed with quiet intensity. Mark hunched over digital photographs, enlarging sections of Lila's wounds on his monitor, while Dr. Elise Harper meticulously documented each injury in her report. "The primary incision shows surgical precision," Elise noted, pointing to the screen. "But these burns around the edges, they're ritualistic, not accidental," Mark nodded grimly. "And this marking?" He zoomed in on the double spiral carved into Lila's inner thigh. Elise's fingers froze over her keyboard. The image triggered a memory she'd tried to bury for 15 years. "I've seen this before," she whispered, her professional detachment momentarily cracking. "Where?" Mark asked, noticing the sudden pallor in her face. "My first year as a medical examiner. A 16-year-old girl found dead in Blackwater Cave. A visual report called it a hiking accident, but—" She pulled up her chair, lowering her voice. "There were identical markings. The locals had stories, old folklore about sacrifices and power. The sheriff shut down the investigation, said it was teenage occult nonsense." "And you believed that?" Mark asked. Elise met his gaze. "I believed something was being covered up. That girl had the same look in her eyes that Lila does, like she'd seen something no one should ever see." Lila's eyes fluttered open, the harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding her. Mark was at her bedside in an instant, his face etched with concern. He waited until she was fully alert before gently asking the question that had been haunting him since she arrived. "Lila, I need to understand what happened to you. Who did this?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl's eyes welled with tears as memories flooded back. "I didn't want to," she choked out. "They said I had to, that it was our way." Her thin fingers clutched at the hospital blanket, knuckles turning white. Through broken sobs, Lila revealed the nightmare. "The midwife, Mrs. Holloway, she's the one who does it to all the girls when they turn 15. She said it was to make us pure, to prepare us." A violent shudder ran through her frail body. "When I tried to run, they caught me. Mrs. Holloway told me if I refused, they would kill me like they did to Jenny last year." Rachel, who had been standing silently in the corner, suddenly collapsed into the nearby chair, her professional composure crumbling. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "They're mutilating children as some sort of ritual." Mark's jaw tightened as he turned to Officer Lane, who had been taking notes. "Blackwood isn't just some quaint mountain village," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "It's a cult that's been hiding in plain sight. They're systematically abusing these girls, and God knows what else they're doing up there." Officer Lane nodded grimly, already reaching for his radio. "I'm calling for backup. We'll need a full team to go up there." "We need to move fast," Mark insisted, glancing back at Lila's bandaged body. "There could be other girls in danger right now. And once they realized Lila's talked to us, the officer was already barking orders into his radio, calling for immediate mobilization of available units. But Mark knew the winding mountain roads to Blackwood would take time to navigate, even with sirens blaring, time that other girls like Lila might not have. The monitors beeped frantically as Lila's body arched on the hospital bed, her limbs thrashing against the white sheets. Her eyes rolled back, revealing only the whites as she convulsed violently. Dr. Mark rushed to her side, calling for a nurse while Rachel stood frozen at the doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth in horror. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the blinds cast striped shadows across the girl's contorted face as she relived the trauma that had been inflicted upon her. "Lila, you're safe now. You're safe," Mark repeated, his voice steady despite the chaos. He gently held her shoulders, not restraining but grounding her as the seizure began to subside. Rachel approached cautiously, tears streaming down her face as she reached for the girl's hand. "Nobody will ever hurt you again," Rachel whispered, stroking Lila's damp hair away from her forehead. "I promise you that." The girl's breathing gradually slowed, her eyes focusing once more as recognition dawned on her face. The terror that had gripped her moments before receded like a tide, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Mark checked her vitals, relief washing over him as they stabilized. "You're doing great, Lila. These episodes should become less frequent as you heal." His reassuring smile masked his concern about the psychological scars that would take far longer to fade than the physical ones. Their moment of calm was shattered when a hospital aide entered, carrying a small package. "This just arrived for Ms. Williams at the front desk," she said, handing it to Rachel with an innocent smile before departing. Rachel frowned, not expecting any deliveries. The brown paper parcel was lightweight, tied with ordinary string. As she unwrapped it, her blood ran cold. Inside lay a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked and repaired, the head sewn back onto its cloth body with crude, uneven stitches. What made her gasp was the spiral, a crimson spiral painted across the doll's back, with what looked horribly like dried blood. A small note fluttered to the floor. Mark picked it up, his face draining of color as he read the 3 words scrawled in jagged handwriting, "The girl must burn." Their eyes met over Lila's bed, the same realization dawning on both of them. The cult knew exactly where she was. The sanctuary of the hospital had been breached. The promise of safety they had just made to Lila now felt hollow. A lie exposed by 3 chilling words and a mutilated doll. "I'll call security," Mark whispered, his hand already reaching for the phone. Rachel nodded, instinctively moving closer to Lila's bed, as if her presence alone could form a protective barrier against the evil that had found them. The hospital hallways felt like a prison despite the doubled security. Mark watched as 2 new guards patrolled outside Lila's room, their hands resting on holstered weapons. The additional protection should have been reassuring, but it only amplified his unease. Every person who walked by became a potential threat. Every shadow a hiding place for someone watching. He knew that if Lila's pursuers were as powerful as they seemed, no amount of hospital security would be enough. When his phone vibrated in his pocket, Mark flinched. Elise's name flashed on the screen. He stepped into an empty consultation room to take the call. "I might have a solution," she said without preamble. "There's an abandoned border clinic near the Wyoming state line. It was a government project that lost funding 5 years ago. It's remote, completely off the grid, and most importantly, off all official records." "Does it have medical equipment?" Mark asked, his mind already racing through what they would need. "Basic supplies, maybe some outdated equipment, but it has generator backup and is built like a bunker. Nobody would think to look there." Mark closed his eyes. "We need to move tonight. I don't think we have much time left." By 11:30, Mark had convinced Rachel to join them, packed essential medical supplies, and arranged for an ambulance through a paramedic friend who owed him a favor. At midnight exactly, they wheeled Lila's bed through the service corridors of the hospital, her IV bags hanging like strange fruit above her still form. The ambulance waited in the loading dock, engine running, exhaust creating ghostly shapes in the cold night air. They loaded Lila inside with practiced efficiency. Mark climbed in beside her while Rachel joined Elise in the front. As they pulled away from the hospital, snow began to fall, fat flakes swirling in the headlights. The city streets gradually gave way to empty highways, the world shrinking to just the reach of their headlights against the gathering white. Mark monitored Lila's vitals, adjusting her medication, watching her face for any sign of consciousness. An hour into their journey, Mark noticed distant headlights in the rear window. They maintained a consistent distance, never drawing closer but never falling behind. He watched them flicker through the snowfall, his heart rate accelerating with each passing minute. "I think we might have company," he said quietly into the cabin intercom. "I see them," Elise replied, her voice tense. "Been there for 20 minutes. Could be nothing." Mark reached for Lila's hand, cold and limp in his own. "Please let it be nothing," he whispered, not believing it for a second. The abandoned clinic loomed before them like a spectre in the grey light of dawn, its broken windows gaping like toothless mouths. Mark's muscles burned as he carried Lila's limp form through the doorway, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The building seemed to exhale around them, a long, sorrowful sigh that whispered of suffering these walls had witnessed. "And over here," Rachel called, her voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. She'd found a cot in what must have been an examination room, its thin mattress covered in a film of dust that puffed up when Mark gently laid Lila down. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she lit the oil lamp she'd brought, casting their faces in a warm, flickering glow that made the shadows behind them seem all the darker. "She's burning up," Mark whispered, placing his palm against Lila's forehead. The teenager's skin felt like fire beneath his touch, her breathing shallow and rapid. "I don't understand how this happened so quickly." Rachel moved methodically around the room, wiping surfaces with antiseptic wipes she'd packed, setting up a makeshift medical station. "This place gives me the creeps," she muttered, glancing at the water-stained ceiling, "but it's better than freezing in the car." 15 miles away, a convoy of police SUVs inched along the treacherous mountain road leading to Blackwood. Lieutenant James Lane gripped the steering wheel of the lead vehicle, his knuckles white with tension. The wipers fought a losing battle against the swirling snow, creating brief windows of visibility before the whiteness closed in again. Dispatch said the last call came from somewhere near the old logging road, Officer Chen said from the passenger seat, studying the GPS. Signal was weak and cut out mid-conversation. Lane nodded grimly. "Whatever's happening up there, I don't like it. 3 missing persons in 2 weeks isn't coincidence." When they finally reached Blackwood, the village greeted them with eerie silence. No children played in yards, no smoke rose from chimneys despite the bitter cold. The few residents visible moved like automatons, their eyes vacant as they watched the police vehicles roll down the main street. "Jesus," Chen whispered. "Oh, it's like everyone's under some kind of spell." Lane pulled up outside the general store, its open sign swinging slightly in the wind. "Fan out. Talk to anyone willing. Something's very wrong here, and I want to know what it is before nightfall." What none of them realized was how the darkness connecting Lila's mysterious condition and Blackwood's silent terror was about to reveal itself, a truth more horrifying than any of them could imagine. The police officers stood their ground as the village chief approached, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Detective Mills took the lead, showing him a photo of Lila and pointing to the spiral brand they'd discovered on other victims. "We know she was here. We know about the mark. What can you tell us about this?" The chief's smile never reached his eyes as he denied knowing anything about the girl or any rituals. But Mills noticed how the villagers gathering behind their leader exchanged furtive glances, eyes that held secrets darker than the coming night. "We should split up," Officer Chen whispered. "Cover more ground before it gets dark." Mills nodded, assigning teams to different sections of the village. He and Chen headed toward a clearing they'd spotted from the road earlier. The smell hit them first. Charred wood and something sickeningly sweet beneath it. In the center stood a blackened post, chains still attached to its base. Chen crouched down, gloved fingers carefully lifting something from the ashes. "Mills," she called, her voice tight, "you need to see this." A scrap of burned skin, small but unmistakable, bore the familiar spiral pattern. The evidence they needed, confirmation that ritual sacrifices had occurred here, perhaps for generations. Mills reached for his radio, fingers trembling slightly as he called for immediate backup and forensic support. The transmission crackled, his colleague's voice breaking up into static before going completely silent. He tried again, but the radio remained dead. Then they heard it, the church bell, its deep toll echoing across the village. Once, twice, 3 times it rang, a signal that sent chills down their spines. From every doorway, villagers emerged, faces now transformed with purpose. They moved slowly but deliberately, forming a circle around the clearing where the officers stood. Some carried torches, others simple farming tools. All began a low, rhythmic chant that seemed to pulse with the fading light. As darkness descended on the village, Mills realized with growing horror that they weren't just investigating a crime, they had stumbled into its continuation. Lila's eyes fluttered open, her body trembling as consciousness returned. The sterile walls of the clinic seemed to close in around her, triggering a flood of memories she desperately tried to suppress. This very room, these same fluorescent lights had witnessed her agony 3 years ago, when she was just 12. The cult had strung her upside down from that very ceiling hook, her blood dripping methodically into ceremonial bowls below. She could still hear Elder Matthias's voice, "The blood of the pure will ensure our harvest." Her fingernails dug into her palms as the memories threatened to drown her. A haunting melody drifted through the clinic windows, sending ice through her veins. Mark rushed to the blinds, peering through the slats. His face went ashen. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Outside, at least 20 figures moved through the tree line, their faces obscured by wooden masks painted with ancient symbols. Each carried a burning torch, the flames illuminating their slow, purposeful advance toward the clinic. Their chanting grew louder, the same hymn they'd sung during her first ceremony. "I knew they wouldn't let you go," Dr. Reeves muttered, frantically checking the clinic's phone. "Lines dead. Cell service too." Mark turned to Lila, his eyes filled with determination rather than defeat. "I prepared for this," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small black device. "When I found you in the woods, I slipped a GPS tracker into the lining of your jacket. My friend at the sheriff's department. He's monitoring it. If we don't check in every hour, he'll send help." Nurse Jenny appeared from the supply room, arms filled with anything that could serve as a weapon. Scissors, scalpels, heavy metal trays. "We need to barricade the doors," she instructed. Her usual gentle demeanor replaced by steely resolve. They worked quickly, pushing filing cabinets against the front entrance, using exam tables to block the rear exit. The chanting outside grew louder, punctuated now by the rhythmic pounding of staffs against the ground. A voice, amplified through some kind of horn, cut through the night. "Return the vessel to us. The girl belongs to the earth." Dr. Reeves placed a protective arm around Lila's shoulders. "Nobody's taking you anywhere," he promised, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Not this time." Through the window, they could see the circle of torches tightening around the clinic. The cult was surrounding them, cutting off all escape routes. Lila's breathing quickened as panic threatened to overwhelm her. How many hours until Mark's friend would notice something was wrong? Would help arrive in time? The cultists formed a tight circle around the clinic, their torches crackling in the night air. Through every crack in the wooden walls, through every gap in the hastily boarded windows, hellish orange light spilled inside. Dr. Elise could make out their silhouettes against the flames, dozens of them, swaying slightly as if moved by some unseen current. The leader stepped forward, his face partially hidden beneath a hood adorned with mountain flowers and small bones. When he spoke, his voice carried an unnerving serenity that chilled Elise more than any shouting could have. "The girl belongs to the mountain," he called out, his words floating through the night air with practiced conviction. "Her blood is the covenant that has kept our valley safe for generations. You interfere with matters beyond your understanding, Doctor." Elise's hands trembled as she checked the revolver, her father's old service weapon she'd never imagined using. The weight felt alien in her palm as she moved toward the window, Lila cowering behind her. Without hesitation, she aimed at the sky and pulled the trigger. The crack of gunfire echoed across the valley, momentarily silencing the chanting. "That was a warning," she shouted. "The next one won't be aimed at the stars." But rather than dispersing, the circle only tightened. The cultists moved forward in unison, their expressions unchanged, as if her threat meant nothing to them. Perhaps it didn't. These people believed they served something greater than themselves, greater than life itself. What was one bullet against such conviction? Behind her, Lila had found a scalpel from the medical tray. Her knuckles were white around the handle, her face a mask of determination, despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I won't go back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I won't scream for them again. I'd rather die here than return to that cave." The front door shuddered violently as something heavy slammed against it. The crude barricade of chairs and cabinets Elise had assembled wouldn't hold for long. Another blow landed, and she heard the wood begin to splinter. The hinges groaned in protest. "We need another way out," Elise hissed, scanning the small clinic desperately. But there was nowhere to run. The cultists had them completely surrounded. Another thunderous impact rocked the door, and this time Elise saw the top hinge tear partially from the frame. The door splintered with a thunderous crash, sending wooden shards flying across the small cabin. Thick, acrid smoke billowed through the doorway, accompanied by the rhythmic chanting of dozens of voices. Mark didn't hesitate for a second, positioning himself between the intruders and Lila, his arms spread wide in a protective stance. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his resolve remained unshakable. "Stand aside, outsider," commanded a tall figure emerging from the smoke. It was the cult's chief, his face grotesquely painted with what appeared to be dried blood, intricate patterns swirling across his weathered features. "The mountain demands its due. The girl carries the mark. She is the chosen vessel for the sacrifice that will ensure our survival through the coming darkness." Behind him, at least 20 cultists in dark robes pressed forward, their eyes reflecting the cabin's dim light with an almost feral intensity. Some carried torches, others ceremonial daggers that glinted ominously. Mark could feel Lila trembling behind him. But when she spoke, her voice carried a surprising strength. "I would rather die by my own hand than let you use me for your sick rituals," Lila declared, suddenly holding a shard of broken glass from the medical tray to her own throat. "Well, come any closer, and your chosen vessel becomes useless to you all." The chief hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of defiance from the girl. The momentary standoff stretched like an eternity, with neither side willing to back down. Mark's mind raced through possible escape routes, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Just as the chief raised his hand to signal his followers forward, a deafening gunshot echoed through the cabin. Everyone froze. Brilliant white floodlights suddenly pierced through the windows and the broken door, momentarily blinding everyone inside. Shouts of "Police! Drop your weapons!" thundered through the night as black-clad Special Forces officers stormed into the cabin from all directions. The cultists scattered in panic, some attempting to flee while others dropped to their knees in surrender. The chief made a desperate lunge toward Lila. but two officers tackled him to the ground before he could reach her. Within moments, the cabin transformed from a site of impending horror to a secure zone, with officers methodically restraining the cultists and escorting them outside. The clinic erupted in flames, thick black smoke billowing through the corridors, where just moments before they'd been fighting for their lives. Mark shielded his face with his sleeve, desperately searching for Lila through the haze. Federal agents in tactical gear stormed through the inferno, one of them scooping up the terrified girl. "We've got her! Moving to extraction point now!" the lead agent shouted over the roar of the fire. Through the chaos, Mark caught a glimpse of the village chief's weathered face, illuminated by the orange glow of flames, before he slipped between the trees like a ghost. Despite everything, the old man's hold over his followers remained unbroken, his escape ensuring the cult would endure, lurking in the shadows of the forest like a dormant disease waiting to spread again. 3 days later, Lila lay in a hospital bed at a secure federal facility outside Cheyenne. The rhythmic beep of monitors provided the only sound in the room. Though physically stable, she hadn't spoken since the rescue, her eyes fixed on some distant point only she could see. Mark slumped in a chair beside her bed, refusing to leave despite Rachel and Elise urging him to rest. "The cult leader is still out there," he muttered, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "As long as he's free, there will be other girls like Lila." Rachel placed a gentle hand on Lila's arm. "You're safe now. No one can hurt you here." Elise leaned forward, her voice soft but urgent. "Lila, we need your help. Everything you know about the community, about their practices and hideouts, it could save others." Mark watched the girl's face for any flicker of response. They needed her testimony to build a case strong enough to dismantle the cult permanently, to prevent more children from suffering the same horrors. But more than that, they needed her to reclaim her voice, to transform from victim to survivor. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the sterile room, as outside the window snow began to fall on the Wyoming landscape, covering everything in a deceptive blanket of purity. Slowly, Lila began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Parker leaned in, straining to hear as the girl's traumatic memories spilled forth. The hospital room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors and Lila's trembling voice. "I was very small when she took me," Lila said. "I don't remember my real parents. The midwife told me they were dead, that they had given me to her as payment for a debt." Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket as she spoke. "She raised me in that remote village, teaching me her ways. But there were rituals." Dr. Parker nodded encouragingly but remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "Every full moon, she would collect my blood in a special bowl. She said children's blood was powerful, that it contained magic." Lila's eyes grew distant. "And she told me I was special because I had survived longer than the others. All the children before me had died before their 15th birthday. She said it was because they weren't strong enough to bear the purification." The doctor felt his stomach tighten. "What happened on the night you came here, Lila?" "It was my purification ceremony. The entire village gathered. They bound me to a wooden post in the center of their circle." Tears began streaming down her face. "The midwife told everyone I was ready to become a woman, that I would either survive and become her successor or join the others who had failed." Lila's hand unconsciously moved to her thigh. As my blood dripped into the bowl, she heated something in the fire. It was a branding iron with strange symbols. When it glowed red, Lila's voice broke. She pressed it between my legs, declaring me purified. I screamed so loud I thought my throat would tear, but no one helped me. They just watched. Dr. Parker fought to maintain his professional composure, despite his horror. "I thought I would die there," Lila continued. "But after midnight, when most villagers had left, A woman I'd never seen before appeared. She cut my ropes and whispered that I needed to run, that she couldn't protect me if I stayed. She gave me some money and pointed toward the road. I ran all night until I collapsed near the highway where those tourists found me. Mark's hands trembled as he held the DNA test results. The room seemed to spin around him as the implications became clear. Elise wasn't just a random woman who'd stumbled into their lives. She was Lila's biological mother. The statistical probability was beyond question, 99.8% match. He looked across the room at Elise, who sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. She'd known, or at least suspected, from the moment she'd seen those ritual scars. "I was barely 18 when they took me in," Elise whispered, her voice cracking. "The cult seemed like salvation at first, a family when I had none. By the time I realized what they were, I was pregnant with Lila." She described her desperate escape in the dead of winter, how she'd planned to return for her newborn daughter but found the compound abandoned. "I thought she was dead all these years. I thought they'd killed her when I ran." The FBI agents who'd been stationed at the hospital since Lila's admission leaned forward, recording every detail. Agent Ramirez nodded grimly as Elise described the cult leader, the same man who'd brought Lila to the hospital claiming to be her uncle. "We've launched a national manhunt," Ramirez explained. "These people have operated in shadows for decades. Your testimony breaks this wide open." That evening, Mark brought colored pencils to Lila's room. The girl had been quiet since learning about Elise, processing the revelation in her own way. "Would you like to draw?" he asked gently. Lila nodded, taking the pencils with practiced hands. Without hesitation, she began sketching a woman's face, Elise's face, with remarkable precision. "She used to sing to me through the wall," Lila said softly, shading the eyes with careful strokes. "I never saw her face clearly until that last night. She helped me escape when they were preparing for the final ritual." The truth hit Mark like a physical blow. Elise had been captive again, in the same house as Lila, both unaware of their connection. Mark watched as Lila continued drawing, adding a small scar near Elise's eyebrow that he'd never noticed before. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, masked by Elise's silent pain and professional demeanor. Some wounds were visible, like the ritual scars on Lila's body. Others remained hidden beneath careful layers of normalcy, perhaps those cut the deepest of all. The snow had finally begun to thaw across Wyoming's rugged landscape when the security alarms at the medical facility erupted in a deafening chorus. Mark was reviewing Lila's latest test results when the emergency lights bathed his office in pulsating red. The intercom crackled with static before going completely silent. The cult had arrived, and they'd come prepared, jamming all communications and somehow managing to divert most of the security personnel to the opposite side of the compound. "They're here!" Elise burst through the door, her face pale with urgency. "Rachel's waiting by the service elevator. We need to move now." Mark gathered Lila into his arms, her frail body weighing almost nothing against his chest. Despite weeks of treatment, she remained dangerously weak, her recovery hampered by the psychological trauma that still haunted her dreams. The four of them convened in the basement corridor, where Rachel was already prying open an access panel. "The old tunnel system," she explained, shining a flashlight into the dusty passage. "Built during the Cold War, it leads to an abandoned church about half a mile east. It's our only chance." Above them, the sounds of violence filtered through the ceiling, shouting, gunfire, and the methodical progression of the cult members as they systematically took control of the facility. They had clearly planned this assault for weeks, setting traps at standard exits and neutralizing security protocols with insider knowledge. "They're blocking every known exit," Rachel whispered as they navigated the narrow passageway. "Someone gave them our blueprints." The tunnels were a claustrophobic maze, cobwebs clinging to their faces as they pushed forward. Mark felt Lila's fingers tighten around his shirt when a distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Her eyes, though frightened, held a determination he hadn't seen before. "I can hear them," Elise hissed, freezing in place. "They're in the tunnel system." The acrid smell of smoke began to fill the passage. Through a ventilation grate, they could see flames licking at another section of the tunnel. The cultists were burning them out, methodically eliminating every escape route. "There's a maintenance shaft ahead." Rachel pointed to a narrow air duct barely wide enough for a person. "It bypasses the section they've blocked, but it's tight." Mark looked down at Lila, knowing he couldn't fit through while carrying her. "Can you crawl through?" he asked gently. Lila's eyes widened with terror at the thought of being separated. But as another explosion rocked the tunnel, something shifted in her expression. The fear remained, but alongside it grew a fierce will to survive that transformed her face. "I can do it," she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. As Mark helped her toward the narrow opening, the smoke grew thicker. Behind them, the rhythmic footsteps of the cult members echoed through the tunnels, drawing inexorably closer with each passing second. The old church doors burst open as Elise, Mark, and Lila stumbled into the night air, their lungs burning with each desperate breath. The momentary relief vanished when shadows emerged from the darkness, cultists in weathered robes converging on them like wolves. Despite their struggles, the mob overwhelmed them, rough hands seizing Lila while others held Elise and Mark at bay. "No! Let her go!" Elise screamed, fighting against her captors as they dragged Lila toward a circle of ancient stones, gleaming silver in the moonlight. The villagers worked with practiced efficiency, binding Lila to a wooden stake at the center of the circle. Kindling and dry branches surrounded her feet, and the smell of gasoline hung in the air. Elise's blood ran cold as flames ignited, small at first, then growing hungrily around Lila's ankles. "Please stop this!" Mark shouted, his voice drowned by the rhythmic chanting that rose from the gathered cultists. Their faces were hidden behind crude wooden masks carved with symbols that matched those from Dr. Whitman's research, the same symbols that had appeared on Lila's skin. Elise thrashed against her captors, watching helplessly as the cult leader approached the circle. His mask, unlike the others, was painted blood red, and in his hand he held a ceremonial torch. The chanting intensified as he raised it high. "The vessel has been prepared," he intoned. "Tonight, the Ancient One returns through flesh made worthy." Lila's terrified screams pierced the night as flames climbed higher, licking at her jeans. Elise managed to break one arm free, but was immediately struck down, tasting blood as she hit the ground. Mark lunged forward only to be beaten back by three robed figures. "You don't understand what you're doing," he yelled, desperation making his voice crack. The cult leader stood before Lila now, torch extended toward her chest. "Uke, with this flame, we complete what began 15 years ago," he declared. Just as the torch touched Lila's shirt, the night exploded with sound and light. Gunshots cracked through the air like thunder, and powerful floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire clearing. Black-clad figures swarmed from the tree line, voices shouting, "Federal agents, on the ground now!" Chaos erupted as cultists scattered in panic. The leader dropped his torch, which fizzled in the dirt as he turned to flee. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as more vehicles approached. Through the confusion, Elise crawled toward Lila, desperate to reach her before the flames could do irreparable damage. The cult members scattered like roaches when light floods a dark room. Many were tackled to the ground by FBI agents in tactical gear, zip-tied and hauled away to waiting vehicles. But in the chaos and smoke, the cult leader, the man who had stolen 15 years of Lila's life, somehow slipped through the dragnet. Mark slammed his fist against the hood of a police car when he got the news, but there was no time to dwell on that failure. Lila needed immediate medical attention. A medical helicopter airlifted her to the specialized burn unit at Washington Medical Center. Her body was a roadmap of trauma, third-degree burns across 20% of her body, malnutrition that had left her bones brittle, and the physical evidence of years of abuse. The doctors were shocked not just by her injuries, but by her resilience. Most people with these injuries would be in excruciating pain, the lead physician told Mark privately. But she hasn't complained once. It's like she's accustomed to suffering in silence. The road to recovery stretched before Lila like an impossible mountain. Each dressing change was agony. Each physical therapy session a battle. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. Mark visited daily, often bringing Rachel, who would sit quietly holding Lila's unbandaged hand. Elise came 3 times a week, always with a new book tucked under her arm. "I want to learn," Lila whispered one afternoon, her voice still raspy from smoke inhalation. "I want to read." And so, between skin grafts and psychological evaluations, Lila began the painstaking process of learning to read. Mark started with simple children's books. Patient as she sounded out each letter, Elise taught her to write her own name, tears welling in both their eyes when Lila first managed to sign a get-well card Rachel had brought her. Even the hospital staff joined in, with nurses bringing flashcards during their breaks. "You're not just healing your body," Rachel told her one evening, as sunset painted the hospital room in amber light. "You're reclaiming your mind, your future." Lila nodded, clutching a dog-eared copy of her first chapter book. She was no longer just a victim, no longer just the girl with the strange markings between her legs that had horrified that first doctor so many months ago. With each new word she learned, each sentence she constructed, she was becoming something more powerful, a survivor with a voice of her own. The investigation into the cult sent shockwaves through the entire region. As federal agents raided multiple properties, they uncovered evidence of atrocities spanning more than 3 decades. Journals documenting purification rituals, photographs of children who had long been reported missing, and underground chambers where the most horrific ceremonies took place. The network of silence that had protected the cult was finally shattered, revealing how local officials had been bribed or threatened into complicity. One by one, survivors began to emerge from the shadows, each bearing scars identical to Lila's, each with a story that mirrored her own nightmare. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a systematic abuse justified by twisted religious doctrine. "They told us we were vessels for demons," explained one woman in her 40s who had escaped 20 years earlier. "The marks were to let the evil out." Her testimony, along with dozens of others, corroborated everything Lila had revealed. The pattern was always the same. Children born with unusual features were labeled as demonic and subjected to cleansing. Many hadn't survived. With the cult leaders facing multiple life sentences, the court granted Lila a new identity and the chance to rebuild her life. Elise, who had never wavered in her commitment, formally became Lila's guardian. They moved to a quiet suburb where nobody knew their history. Mark and Rachel remained steadfast supporters, visiting often and helping Lila navigate her new world of normal teenage experiences, school dances, driving lessons, college applications. On her 17th birthday, at a small gathering with her chosen family, Lila made an announcement that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I've decided what I want to do with my life," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm going to medical school. I want to become a doctor who specializes in genetic conditions and birth differences." Later that year, Lila agreed to give one carefully controlled interview to raise awareness. With her face obscured, but her voice strong, she looked directly into the camera. "I am not a demon. I am not a mistake. I am human. My differences don't make me less. They've made me stronger. I will become a doctor, and I will heal others who've been told they don't belong. That's my purpose now." The ceremony hall fell silent as Lila took her place at the podium, the weight of her white doctor's coat, familiar now after 7 years of practice. The spotlight caught the silver threads in her neatly tied hair, premature grey, a physical reminder of what she had survived. She looked out at the sea of faces, no longer feeling the need to hide or shrink away from their gaze. In the front row, Mark dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, his pride radiating through his tears. Beside him sat Elise, her hand clasped tightly with Rachel's, both women who had become family to Lila in the years following her rescue. The presenter had just finished announcing her as Dr. Lila Matthews, recipient of this year's National Courage Award for her groundbreaking work with survivors of abuse. "When I was 15, Lila began, her voice steady and clear where once it had trembled. "The doctor saw beyond my injuries to recognize a child who needed saving. Today, I stand before you not defined by what happened to me, but by what I chose to do with my second chance." The audience listened in reverent silence as she spoke of her journey from patient to physician, of the specialized clinic she had founded for children escaping situations like hers. Not once did she mention Blackwood by name, though everyone knew the story, how a rural cult had been exposed and dismantled, its leaders imprisoned, its victims freed. 300 miles away, nature had begun reclaiming the abandoned buildings of what once was Blackwood. Vines crawled up the walls of the community center where Lila had been held. The compound where she had suffered now stood empty, a forgotten place mentioned only in hushed tones and court records. "Healing isn't linear," Lila continued, her fingers brushing against the small scar at her wrist, the only one she no longer kept hidden. "Some days are harder than others, but I want every survivor to know that your darkest moment doesn't have to be your defining one." As she concluded her speech, Mark remembered the frightened girl who had once flinched at shadows. Now she stood tall, her smile genuine and unguarded for the first time since he'd known her. A smile without the edge of fear that had lingered for so long. The standing ovation washed over her like a cleansing wave. Later, as they celebrated quietly at dinner, Lila raised her glass in a toast. "To finding light in unexpected places," she said, "and to becoming that light for others." That night, a teenage girl in crisis would arrive at Lila's clinic, and the cycle of healing would continue. Proof that even from the deepest wounds, something beautiful could grow.